And sometimes we need some sort of plan to not get swooped up by out of balance situations, you know. So we can't ignore that life is still happening and, storms maybe pass by and things happen, But to have a solid routine that always anchors you into this place of no storm can, you know, tackle this strong base of mine. Yeah, that's a great attitude to have, right? Because before I was like avoiding the storm. Now I'm like, nope, because I have an anchor. I don't mind it. It's fine. So, um, and that's also how you lose actually fear. Because if you're against the storm, you still feel like the fear is still pressing like a pressure point against it. But when you actually truly just like have an anchor of gratitude and you feel really deeply rooted in your own presence of energy and nothing is internally getting dysregulated in your nervous system and your nervous system stays solid throughout the storm, then you're like, oh, not only it passed very fast, but at the same time, it's very rewarding because you didn't take any help from outside. You didn't seek anything outside of yourself to help you through the challenging times. And I mean, like, yes, the universe, the energy, the life force energy is supporting you, the spirit, but you are also contributing massively to your well-being. So it's very important to give yourself also the thank you and the gratitude for yourself that you know remained devotionally comforting to yourself and to others, but first always to yourself, because you can't help anyone if your own system is shivering. you know so I wanted to also talk about what actually addictions do to our system. So, what, from my personal observation, and there are so many addictions, you know, being involved previously in lots of organizations that deal with, um, addiction issues and how to manage addictions. There are so many self-supporting groups that I highly recommend if people reach, at the beginning, you definitely need support. You definitely need some guidance. So I highly recommend any sort of self-help groups, therapists, or whatever to ask for specific help and guidance, but you have to be also obviously ready to receive that guidance, because no addiction in the world will be tackled or managed if you are not really committed to it. So for me personally, I had to be really, really fed up with it. I had to be tired of being tired. I had to be tired of being, oh, it's fine, it's not that bad. No, everything that is not a conscious choice of my being is an unconscious behavior which is leading usually to a snowball effect of addiction. Addiction is just a repetition behavior. So a habit that just suddenly gets out of control because it's a momentum. The good thing is we can be, if it's like an addiction, when it's like snowball effect with getting more money, getting more love, getting more happiness, that's a good momentum. That's a good snowball effect. But if it's a substance abuse, that's a negative um, snowball effect that goes usually backwards. So first it starts like, oh, it just helps me a little bit, and then it becomes a complete reliability because you rely on it, and then you can't be with it without it, and then you think, oh, Now I really need it, and then that's the sort of circle of addiction. And how does it happen? Because something is clearly out of balance in your overall spirit. That's what I believe. And that's where we can investigate the unconscious pattern underneath. Every addiction, we will find usually an unconscious trauma that we have to love through, heal through love, obviously, and compassion and understanding and grace and, everything that we need to gain from this knowledge of seeing that particular pattern of trauma. And then we heal it so the addiction automatically falls away. If you just go against addiction, there will be not a long lasting result. It will still feel like you're doing so much heavy lifting, but it doesn't let go of you because the trauma will still bring the addiction always back to the place of you need me, because that's the whole point of trauma. It serves actually a purpose of investigation to actually convert this particular trauma into more love. And only when you convert that, it balances itself out and the addiction falls away very naturally. So that's something, and I'm talking about general, right? Like there can be addiction to TV shows, to shopping, to cigarettes, to alcohol, to food, to being addicted to people, constant exposure to people, cannot be alone. Like there is so much love and codependency and all sorts of addictions that can be investigated, and you can definitely figure out what is actually underneath this addiction, what kind of trauma is it, heal it deeply through self-awareness, understanding, loving it, because it's actually out of balance brain, I believe, that then over the time creates a pattern in the subconscious mind. So it first becomes just a mental thing, and then it's inside the body because it's been practiced for so many years. So that's how addiction is usually built up in the nervous system. And then your nervous system can't be without it. So we have to retrain the nervous system first to be safe. So to feel through this um, trauma, understand the trauma, because only if we understand the trauma, it actually truly becomes lightweight. And then we're like, oh, it was actually not that bad. But the child's brain, that's where the trauma is. So the child's brain still feels it's exactly the same way how it perceived it. So basically, we have to bring it up to the front of our consciousness now that we have wisdom and matureness and not and we are not a child anymore. So that's where we can tackle it and bring the love that we are now from an adult point of view of loving and understanding the situation. Sometimes support is needed and sometimes you can tackle it yourself. And this child will be listened to, heard out, comforted, secured, and loved so deeply till the trauma automatically dissolves into love. And then the whole addiction that was on top of it, that was just sort of covering it up, is released automatically. So it's actually not that difficult. It's only difficult to tackle addiction if you just go for the addiction, but not for the pain and the need. It's like you putting a plaster on the wound, but the wound is not healing. The plaster will not do anything. So you cannot just give up the addiction without healing the underneath. You will just shift to something else, most probably, because that's the truth of addiction. From personal experience and also from observing all the other addicts, that's what usually happens. If the wound underneath is not healed, the pattern will just repeat itself, but just in other places or other things. And that's why the wound has to be healed fully with love. And love, sometimes it's also important to understand that Some people don't understand tough love because there is a balance between tough love and compassionate love, right? Compassion is when you understand why someone is acting out of their child's brain. That's a compassion, right? Because like, oh, he was explosive and he was shouting because he can't help himself because he has a childhood trauma. But on top of it, we also have to be mindful that if this discovery was made and the pattern is outside, it has to be tackled. If not, there has to be a distancing and tough love. Tough love for me is you let the person deal with it themselves. You cannot support someone who doesn't want to tackle their issues because that becomes then a drainage from yourself. So that's something that in nature it wouldn't be supported. So don't do anything what nature wouldn't do. Nature will not nurture something that is actually not nurturing and wants to get well themselves. On top of it, there has to be a very clear discernment like, is this person capable? Is this person actually doing all it can to actually heal this? Like, does it, like, I can support it with all the awareness, all the, knowledge, but does the person actually feel it wants to change? Because there is a clear yes and no answer. Do you want to fix this issue? And if a person says no, then you also have to be compassionate to understand, okay, it's fine. But then I can't be participating into the misery of someone else's addiction path. So basically, what I wanted to say is addiction is easy to tackle if you know how to approach it and what you have to do to fix the issue. But if then still the person doesn't want to go this path, then no addiction can be fixed. There's only over time fixing because it was also over time developed. So it's a process and which worth millions because once you recover all this love from all this unconscious trauma pattern, this love will then secure you so deeply and transform your whole reality. Your nervous system becomes so happy, so calm, so peaceful, so loving that your nervous system then cannot be ever shaken again. And that's why it's so rewarding to heal from trauma and heal from addiction, which is just on top of trauma. There's no addiction without the trauma, but the trauma needs to be tackled and surrendered and healed. If there is no willingness from the person to tackle the trauma, there will not be a long-term solution for this addiction purpose. There's just, and it can be anything. So if the love from inside, that's why self-love is the number one start from within. If you don't have enough self-love to want to stop this habit that maybe is not beneficial for you, and you don't know yet how, and you're miserable and whatever, it's fine. But there has to be this urge of, I really love myself enough to wanting to make a difference, want to make a change, want to work on myself. Very, very crucial part. And the rest will then unfold very well if and supported if the first step is very clear of committing to a progress of getting better, you know, over time. So the other thing is gratitude that I wanted to talk about. Gratitude. So gratitude. You know, I love to play a gratitude game because sometimes it's a word and I'm talking about gratitude as a feeling, right? Being grateful for waking up, being grateful for food that you have on your plate, being grateful for health, being grateful for eyesight, being grateful for the nature, being grateful for the rain, being grateful for the sun, being grateful for so many things, for my coffee, being grateful for all of life. Yet, it's so easy to get carried away into the mass consciousness of not enoughness and more. And the thing is, more is not an issue because more is automatically happening. If you're on a devotional path of more love and more joy, more goodness will happen organically because that's the momentum that now is happening. Because remember when I said about addiction, there is a momentum that is downward spiral because it's an addiction that is still connected to a trauma. So it basically still trauma re-triggering, re-triggering. So then there's this pull towards negativity, negativity, negativity. So that's why it becomes darker and darker and darker and worse, worse, worse for those people. And then when you're on the path of getting better and you're affirming goodness upon you after you've healed and investigated all your trauma, and healed your inner child's brain that all had the same memories with the child's brain, not adult brain and the trauma, because then you will realize it's not that bad. But the problem is it's always the trigger in the child's brain that gives you exactly behavior like a child. Sometimes obnoxious, sometimes shouting, sometimes being crazy, sometimes acting out. That's how a child that has no awareness and is triggered from a trauma that feels threatening, that's how a child behaves. And that's why it's so important to heal this child's brain so you can actually mature your brain and be wise. Wisdom is actually just having cured your childhood's brain. So then you can actually be a true adult without the burden of feeling heavy, because sometimes adults go through life and they feel heavy because they still walking around with their inner child and the adult mind, and then they constantly have this conflict inside of them. That's why it's so important to heal this inner child so you can actually be a good adult and not a miserable adult. So again, back to gratitude, that's where the good adult healed adult starts. And a grateful, healed adult has a completely different life experience and can now be a proper parent to others, to themselves and to others, and maybe to future children because the inner child is healed. Because can you imagine children having other children? And I'm not talking about children, I'm talking about an unhealed couple that is still having fights and drama and you know disputes that still acts out from the brain of a child that is still not healed and then has children. So basically that's how it is. That's how you then reinforce the same pattern to the next generation. So my extreme and really heartfelt desire is to heal exactly this pattern generation. And I feel like for my family, I did heal that, but to bring about the change in others. And not because I need to change anything, just by sharing my own experience, maybe it can help someone. So I personally really believe that you can be a wonderful parent to yourself, to others, to your children, to whatever you need to be a mature, confident soul if your brain is healed from all the childhood trauma. And then life becomes normal, becomes you dealing with other adults that did the same thing and went through the phase of healing. So suddenly you're out of this misery pattern and into gratitude pattern. So then gratitude becomes actually a byproduct and it's very easy to practice. But the mind has still sometimes the openness to it, right? So, which is great because we can learn so much new things. But at the same time, just not to get confused into the world, it's sometimes really cool to play the game of gratitude. So, for example, I woke up and I'm like, oh, Let's see. Like, I don't want to get washed away already from the beginning of the day. Let's play the game of gratitude. So I'm getting dressed to go for my dog walk. I'm grateful that I have this beautiful dog. I'm grateful that I'm putting a leash on. I'm grateful that someone opened the door. I'm grateful that people are mindful of respecting my boundaries. I'm grateful that people smile at me and say hello and good morning if they see me on the dog walk. I'm grateful for the birds twitching around and singing a song. I'm grateful for a beautiful, safe walk, warm climate. I'm grateful that I arrived home safely, and I'm grateful that I have food for the dog, you know, and that's like a reinforcement already to start the day in alignment, not to get washed away by thoughts that maybe could contradict this gratitude pattern. And I'm not saying that's the solution for everything, but it's pretty much an easy tool to realign yourself. Gratitude is really soothing the nervous system, because then there's automatically in the world of normally place of lack, which is the childhood trauma children brain lack. Then you have the adult brain activation of being mindful and activating the pattern of no, there is no lack, there's gratitude for already amazing things. And it doesn't mean that you don't desire more. Of course, you can, but there is not this constant pattern of this not good, this is not good, this is not enough, this is not enough. Not enough is such a victim mentality, which will just bring about more not enoughness. And gratitude is a definitely healed, safe mental health condition. Gratitude is not just a word, it's really a healed state. And to reinforce it, and like I always say, like, how many years did it take you to go in the wrong direction? So please go into the right direction and maintain it for long, long time, most probably forever. If you want to be forever in a grateful place, maintain the gratitude forever. So, you want to receive more and goodness, just stay grateful forever. What's the deal? Like, what's the deal? There shouldn't be that, you shouldn't be a rocket scientist to understand that if you just maintain your gratitude and always stay mindful of what you're actually producing into this world, what sort of speech, what sort of thoughts, what sort of actions on a day-to-day small base. That's the snowball effect. That's the snowball effect of goodness that becomes big goodness. So yeah, that's the wisdom for today. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.